All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Isaac Wink. I'm the Research Data Librarian here at UK Libraries, and I'm very excited to be able to invite you all to this, our final event for Love Data Week 2024, on exploring US newspapers with the Chronicling America API. So this is a hands-on workshop that I've put together with the idea of providing both an introduction to Chronicling America, which is a very cool historical resource in its own right, but also use that as an opportunity to introduce some concepts of the way that we might think about how we transform newspaper text into a form of data that we can use and manipulate in different ways, as well as learn a little bit about how computers and other machines exchange information with each other. So as the note on the slide says, we're going to be using a Google Colab notebook and be performing some text mining functions later on in this workshop. But to get started, we'll just be using some slides and going to the Chronicling America website some as we explore that. So do go ahead and save a copy of that notebook for now, particularly because it includes a lot of the information that's on the slides as well. So if you want to revisit any of what we talk about here, there's some context given on the notebook in order to be able to do that. So quick overview of where we're going to be going today. We're going to start by looking some at the Chronicling America newspaper collection, what it is, what it contains, what it doesn't contain, and then we'll use some searches there to explore some of the ways that the Chronicling America server encodes searches that we put in as humans in a way that a machine can understand, and use that as a way to provide an introduction to APIs or application programming interfaces as a way of accessing data. And then once we do that, we'll actually be able to fetch some of that data ourselves to explore some of these historical newspapers through text mining in Python and maybe be able to find some insights that we wouldn't be able to get just by reading pages by hand or, as we would as humans. Now, before we get started, I do just want to have a note on the fact that Chronicling America is a collection of historical newspapers from much of it from the 1800s and 1900s, which in many ways reflect the views of their creators. And that includes a lot of hurtful or harmful language that readers today would certainly find offensive or repugnant. And that is not at all the point of Chronicling America as a resource. It's not at all the point of this workshop today, nor do I anticipate that any of the examples that I show are going to in any way profile any of that harmful language. But it is something that's important to keep in mind when working with newspaper data, especially at scale, that it's something that you may come across depending on your search parameters and depending on which pages you're working with. So with that, what is Chronicling America? Well, it's a joint project that comes from the National Digital Newspaper Project, and it's a joint project between the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Library of Congress. And it's been a nationwide project for over a decade now to digitize newspapers that span the time and geography of the United States as a way of giving researchers, students, the public, anyone with an internet connection, a way to get free access to a lot of different time periods and events in US history through the press. So I'm going to drop some links into the chat, which we'll explore as well as a way of just sort of getting a handle on what the collection looks like. But one thing that I want to emphasize at the top is that while it is very extensive, this is by no means a full collection of all newspapers published in the United States. Digitizing all of them would be an extremely difficult and arduous process. And while they're still being added to, in fact, the University of Kentucky just got awarded another grant to digitize an additional 100,000 pages. While it's still being added to, it doesn't capture literally every newspaper that has ever been published in the United States. So that's something important to keep in mind, just if you do perform any analysis with it or any research claims that you want to make about it, it doesn't cover everything that's out there. But so the first link that I shared is just sort of an introduction to the Chronicling America collection and a number of supplemental resources that the Library of Congress provides on it. If you are interested in that full list of all newspapers published in the United States, there's this newspaper directory made available by the Library of Congress that will direct you to some newspapers that we know exist and know are out there, but haven't necessarily gotten digitized yet. But the collection itself contains tens of thousands of different publications and millions, tens of millions of individually scanned pages. And we get a lot of very cool access to them thanks to the hard work and labor that's gone into that. This is sort of a, a good general overview of the content that you can find in Chronicling America. And it's a map based on geography of all of the different places where different newspapers are published. And then if you actually zoom in on a location such as Kentucky, then you can hover over each of these dots to see more information about the particular paper that it covers, and then information about when it was published. So this paper, The Citizen, came out of Berea, Kentucky, and Chronicling America includes 1,200 about digitized issues of it, with the earliest issue being digitized in 1899 and the latest in 1922. So you can hover over any of these dots as a way of getting information about that newspaper. But what's important to keep in mind is that a lot of these cover very disparate time ranges. So you could, if you wanted to, sort of get a snapshot of everything that came out of Kentucky, but those would be published at different time periods. In order to get more of a sense of the temporal coverage, there's this other resource, which is a map both of geography, and it just takes a second to load, but a map both of geography and time period as well. So this visualization over here shows the number of digitized pages by year. And we can see, while there are some from early national history from the 1700s onward, things really start to pick up in the 1850s, and then they really peak in the early 1900s and 1910s. So if you're considering a project that's looking at a particular time period, this is a good place to start to get a sense of how much coverage will there be in the Chronicling America collection of that time period. You'll notice too, by the way, that some of these actually extend into the later 1900s. So part of the reason we have so much of this content from the early 1900s is because that's the latest date where those pages are definitely in the public domain. So it's okay for the Library of Congress to showcase these like full text and full image versions of them. There are some newspapers from this later time period that are believed to be in the public domain, and so some of those are included. But the hope is sort of that as more of these pages come into the public domain, more of them will get added into the future as well. The other thing that's really cool about this page is you can actually narrow it down by a state. So if we want to look at temporal coverage specifically for Kentucky, then we can click on Kentucky there, and then this graph showing number of digitized pages by year will narrow itself down to just show Kentucky there. So again, a good way to see, if you've got like a particular state that you want to study, this can be a good way of getting a sense of what's available for you there in the Chronicling America collection. And then the last snapshot of the collection that I wanted to showcase was this map showing newspapers from different racial or ethnic perspectives in the United States. In the selection process for these pages or for these newspapers that states have decided to digitize has made an effort to really capture the breadth of U.S. history here. And the ethnic and racial press has been a very important part of that. So here you can, for example, look specifically at African American newspapers to get a snapshot of all of those. So if you are wanting to cover pages from a particular racial or ethnic viewpoint, or do a project on the history of like the Black press or the Latino press in the United States, Italian, German press, etc., this would be a way of taking a look at which news pages are out there and which states they're coming from. So that's sort of a general overview of the collection. What's really cool about Chronicling America is the ability that it gives us to really narrow down onto particular pages and look at different look at content on on those individual pages. So there is sort of a simple search interface that Chronicling America makes available for being able to search, but I really encourage use in looking at this advanced search page because it allows for really narrowing things down. So for example, you can select a search by a particular state, by a particular newspaper. Maybe you used one of those previous visualizations that we looked at to narrow down to just a single newspaper that you wanted to look at. This would be the best way to select it and make sure that you get the spelling of it right. You can also narrow it down by date range of when the paper was published, or to only look at pages from a particular time period. Or what's really cool is the ability to actually search the text of the pages themselves in a lot of different specifications. You could put in a list of words that you want included. You could have a list of words that all have to be included and appear on a single page. You can include a phrase text of words that need to appear in that exact order, or you could have words that need to appear in conjunction, close enough to each other in proximity, but all somewhere on the page. So when you actually put in a search like this here, I put in a search for Kentucky newspapers with the phrase Abraham Lincoln as an exact match for there. When you do that, you'll be presented with a list of pages that look something like this one. So this is an ad for war bonds from which one? World War I believe, but which was making an appeal to the Civil War, to residents of Berea, to purchase war bonds in support of the U.S. effort in the World War. And you'll notice that the words here, I'm actually going to make this bigger. So you'll notice that the words Abraham Lincoln are actually highlighted in red here because I searched for that phrase in order to be able to find this. And this is one of the parts of Chronicling America that I really find to be quite extraordinary, that they actually make all of that page level searching available. And that too is the product of some really intense labor on the part of the people who worked on this project, as well as a process known as optical character recognition, where these pages are actually fed into a computer, which is trained to be able to recognize text, which, if you think about it, is just ink on a piece of paper. And it's able to recognize that text as text that is transformed and understandable by a computer. And that's what makes this page level searching possible here. It means, though, that OCR, or optical character recognition, is not always perfect. It does lead to some mistakes, which we'll talk about in a little bit here as well. But I also wanted to showcase what we can actually do with these news pages. So one thing that I like to do is go to different important events in US history and just sort of see what were the front pages on those different days. So this is a page from September 14th, 1901, which was shortly after William McKinley, the president, was assassinated. Sometimes you need to be a little bit flexible in the date range that you put in, because obviously information transfer was a lot slower, so things wouldn't always make the front page news the next day, and newspapers wouldn't always publish every day. So you do need to do a little bit of exploring there. But seeing something like this, just the way this is sort of phrased, is something that I find to be very interesting. But if we actually go to that news page, and do I have that pulled up here? Yes, I do. So once we've found a news page, maybe we've done a search for this date here specifically and looked at all those news pages, we can actually move around and scroll on the page, which is a lot more useful when you've got a newspaper that has a lot of tiny text crammed into an individual page, but it's quite easy on this one. There are some options to be able to snip out a particular image of this if we wanted to get that picture of William McKinley. We can also download this page as a PDF. So if you wanted to go and collect individual news pages this way, that's something that you can do. And then lastly, we can go to this text option here to actually get to the text of the page itself. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about how that OCR process is not perfect. It got a lot of this title pretty well, that President William McKinley is dead. But if you look down to the San Francisco part, it looked like it struggled a little bit with actually writing out the term San Francisco there. The other thing that we can do here is actually click on this TXT bit at the bottom to get just the text of this page and absolutely nothing else. Um, so this on its own, it's very readable to us as humans, which is nice, but this is also a very clean web page and something that's very easy to feed into a computer as well, which is something we'll get into in just a second. Before we do that, though, I just want to draw your attention to the URL here and how this has changed as we've clicked through here. So we started with this URL that we had here that just goes up to this. It includes this Chronicling America base string, this LCCN SN number. That is the cataloging information for this particular newspaper used by the Library of Congress, so we can tell it apart from others. This 1901-09-14 refers to the date of this publication. The edition is normally one because most papers only publish one edition per day. But if there were multiple per day, this would be the way of distinguishing between them. And this SEQ1 refers to the page number of that newspaper. So all of these searches that or all of this, as we moved around between here, a lot of that string or a lot of that URL stays the same. Even here on this page, that's just plain text, we still have all of that identical up to this OCR.text at the bottom. And if we actually go back to the previous page here, then we have the OCR, just not that .txt telling us what file type that URL points to at the end. So the reason I draw your attention to this is because this is a very useful feature of Chronicling America. It organizes everything based on the idea of an individual news page with that sequence number and with all of that other information that helps you get down to that news page. And then from there are other places that you can go with it, to the PDF, to the OCR text, etc. So those URLs can actually be very useful to us. And we're going to explore those in a bit more detail as well. So as I just discussed, the URL for an individual news page looks like this. Here I've broken it down a little bit to try to make it a bit more understandable. We've got that URL base. We have the LCCN number to tell us which newspaper it is. We have the date, edition, and page number. And then we have the data format. So this OCR.text, remember, took us just to that plain page with the text and nothing else. Now, that was what the URL looks like for an individual page. The URL for a search is going to be a lot longer, but here I've broken it down again as a way of trying to make it a little bit more understandable. So we have, again, that base URL at the top. We've got this search pages results that just narrows down the search to looking specifically at news pages as opposed to entire papers. And then we have all of these different parameters here. Which state is it published in? Are we looking at an individual newspaper? And if so, what's its LCCN number? Are we searching for a particular date? Does the newspaper need to be published in a particular language? And then all of these having to do with different text. And because I have the phrase text for University of Kentucky filled in here, that indicates that this is going to be a search specifically for the phrase University of Kentucky. You'll notice that a lot of these search parameters are empty, and that's okay. Basically, whenever we make a search using that advanced search page that I showed earlier, the URL that gets returned will include all of these different fields. Most of them will be emptied. They'll be separated by this and sign, but anything that we filled in will include that date info, or will include information for that parameter. Now, the other thing that's worth noting is that even though that's the URL that the search automatically generates, Chronicling America will actually accept searches even if they don't have all of that information right there. So, for example, we could put together a much shorter URL right here that only has information about a couple of these parameters. So looking at this top one here, anybody have any guesses of what this search will take us to if we search for this URL, either in the chat or on mic? So we can try this out and actually see. Yeah, Jennifer, you're exactly right. This will take us to newspapers that mention University of Louisville and specifically have that exact phrase, University of Louisville, in it. And if we paste that in, then we can see that's exactly what we've been taken to here. There are 475 results containing the phrase University of Louisville. And we can see from our URL as well that this is specifically for newspapers in Kentucky. Now, that's very powerful because it means that we can actually adjust these URLs ourselves sort of by hand. So we could, if we wanted to, remove that Louisville part at the end and just type straight back into the URL, Kentucky, without having to actually go and do another search. And that automatically makes this change for us. And we can see all of those red portions are areas where University of Kentucky is mentioned. The thing that's important to keep in mind here, though, is that part of the point of this advanced search page is sort of to limit parameters to only entries that are going to be valid. And so one example of this is this other URL. Um, Anybody have any guesses of what will happen if we try searching this with a state field as Canada? Yeah, Katie, exactly. No results. And we can try just actually putting that in and see we get nothing. And so if we had gone through the advanced search field and selected a state here, Canada obviously would not be an option because this is a controlled entry field. But when it comes to editing URLs, we don't necessarily have that sort of same protection. So it's important if you are making changes yourself there that you keep in mind if something is a controlled field or not. Sometimes this is a little bit of trial and error, along with sort of figuring out exactly what is meant by these parts of the URL like that phrase text and text or text. Some of those, phrase text is sort of self-explanatory, but what or text means might not be as explanatory. So one way to figure out what these mean is to by using the advanced search page to play around a little bit with searches and see what the URL looks like after you perform that search. But the other thing you can do is read the documentation, which will be linked to in the notebook that I talk about in just a little bit. So why does it matter for us to be thinking about these URLs at all when we just have that advanced search page? What I'm really trying to emphasize here is that the thing that's special about those URLs is that's how Chronicling America translates what we enter, on this page with boxes and pictures. That's pretty easy for us to understand as humans. That URL is how the system puts everything together into one line that a computer can understand in order to produce the search results for us. The other thing that can be useful about this is if you are searching for individual pages and want to save that search, then you can just copy that URL and then that will produce the same search results every time, which is very useful. But now we're actually going to get into some other applications here of how we can use that URL for text mining to actually look at some pages in bulk. And so for that, we're going to turn to the Google Colab notebook that I mentioned earlier. If you don't have a copy of it already, I'm going to put the link for you to be able to access this in the chat. And then there are some, so as I mentioned, I included all of the information that I discussed on those slides previously up here as well. So we're not going to go through this right now, but just if you want to revisit any of those concepts, or if you want to go back and look at any of those maps that we mentioned, for example, this top part will explain all of that. But we're going to get started down here with the using the Chronicling America API for text mining section. And so an API, as I mentioned at the start, stands for Application Programming Interface, and it is essentially the way that two computers talk to each other and how they exchange data. You can think of it as being the opposite of a graphical user interface or a GUI, which is the way that a human will give information to a computer. So something like that advanced search page, like I mentioned, works out very well for us as humans, but it won't necessarily work out as well for a computer to be able to, understand all those individual clicks or what all of that information looks like on the page. And that's where the API comes in. The Chronicling America API is a relatively simple one to use because all of that information just gets encoded into a URL. So if we take a little time to be able to understand that URL, then we will be able to have a better ability to um, get the newspapers into a form that we can manipulate and analyze using a computer. Before we get into that, just a couple notes on the Google Colab notebook space. So if you're just following along with my version of this, you'll be able to view everything, but you won't be able to run anything here. If you have saved and made your own copy though, you'll be able to edit all of this however you want. These cells are going to run Python code, but nothing is going to be downloaded to your computer. All of this is being run out of a virtual machine on Google servers. So don't worry about any references to anything being downloaded. That's onto the virtual machine, not your own computer here. This is a good interface because we can do all of the coding interaction that we need in a web browser. The other thing I'll mention is if a Colab notebook is essentially a mix of text cells and code cells. So this right here, for example, is a text cell. If you double click on it, then you'll see this markdown version of it that comes up. We're not going to be doing any editing of the text. So if you do get into that view, just click into another cell and then you'll get back out of that view. But mainly what we're going to be doing is running these Python cells. The point of this workshop primarily is not to cover the details of what's going on with Python. So I'll explain a little bit of what's going on here. But don't worry, if you don't have Python experience or if you're not sure what the code is doing, the point of this is just sort of to get us a few steps ahead to text mining applications. And then I'll be happy to take any questions about the code or do consultations afterwards if you would like to dig deeper. So in order to run one of these cells, we just need to press this play button next to it. What this code block does is it's going to take this URL that we enter. It's going to feed it into some Python code from this requests library. And essentially what that does is Python is taking this URL and then going to it and then fetching whatever data it can find there. You might recognize this URL as the same sequence or as the same URL for that page from the newspaper about William McKinley being assassinated. And now we can see we've actually been able to print this out here in our notebook. We have this text now in a form that a computer can understand and work with. And that's a really essential part of how you get started with text mining is figuring out how you're going to get from that text, which keep in mind, is created for humans to read into a form that a computer can read. So what's really cool about this, though, is that here we access just one page of text, but we don't need to access just one page at a time. We can actually get an entire page or even more, like hundreds of newspapers at a time, to be able to analyze them in a much bigger way. And those will not come out in this pretty clean text format. They're going to come out using a file format known as JSON, which we'll look at in just a second, but is essentially a way, a convenient format for computers to swap data with each other. And we're going to do that using this, this code block right here that builds the URL for the Chronicling America API. I've broken this down into a couple different sections so that if you want to make your own changes here, for example, search for another state, or search for another term other than University of Kentucky, you can enter that here yourself and make those changes if you would like. And then it will, this code block will take all of that information you enter and string it together into this URL. And with that, this extra bit we added at the end, this just tells Chronicling America that we want to access the data in a JSON format as opposed to a text format. One thing that I'll ask you, please not edit right now, is this rows column or this rows portion. This communicates how many news pages we want to access at a time. I've set it to a low limit of 5 just for the sake of this workshop. I want to avoid risking overloading the Chronicling America servers. when people request thousands or tens of thousands, millions of pages at a time, that can actually block the system for other people. We probably could actually go much higher than 5 here, but just in order to be considerate, I'm keeping it low. And please make sure I ask that you do the same as well. So when we run this code block, and maybe you've put in your own search terms here, um, what it will do is actually put this together into a URL, which is something that we can actually click here. Um, and again, this is going to format the data as JSON. So this isn't going to look too pretty, but we can actually view this. So if we go here, it's just a big wall of a lot of different text. This is not pretty. It's not something that we can really read easily, but we can read it a little bit if we try. So we can see that this search returned 50,000 total items. It doesn't include all of them because remember, it just includes 5 pages. But if we look at the first page that gets returned, we can see this county Madison bit telling us what county this first news page came from. We can see how frequently it was published, weekly. We can see its ID number, which includes information about that newspaper, about that paper, as well as the particular day on which it was published. We can see the title of that paper, information about when it was published. And then here we can see we're actually starting to get into the text of the page itself. It was in great part due to this ability that in the wonderfully rich treasures, and on and on. So I like to point this out, not just to sort of give you a sense of how computers are passing information between each other. This is a format where we actually can read it a little bit if we try, but obviously that's not something we would ever want to do. That's just sort of to show you what that URL goes to. Now, if you did make your own search here and you put in something that is returning no results, then I would recommend going back and adjusting your search term. It's possible, maybe you're just searching for something that was never covered in Kentucky newspapers, and that's okay, but it won't give you very interesting results for this workshop. So now that we have a URL, we can actually now that we have a URL that gives us multiple pages at a time, this is where things get interesting because we can actually start writing and executing code that will look at all of those pages at once and give us some insights that are different from what we would get if we just read this on a page instead. The way it's going to do this, the way we're going to do this is by using this pandas library and by running this next cell, this one that starts with import pandas. Pandas is used for working with tabular data in Python. So you can kind of think of this as a spreadsheet similar to Excel. We have different column headings and we have different rows for each item. So when we just read the URL that we put in here into pandas, this on its own isn't actually very interesting because all of that interesting data is locked in this items column. And if you think about it, each item in this, each cell here is essentially its own miniature table. So what we need to do in order to do some interesting work with this is basically go into this column and pull out all of those subcolumns and make a new table with them. And that's what this next code area will do. This one that starts out with a note that it pulls out each page's date, title, place, and text and converts them into a table here. And now we're starting to get something that is actually looking more usable to us. We can see the date where each of these was published. We can see the title, its ID, the place where it was published, how frequently it was published, and then most importantly, the text. This text is there's still way too much on a single news page for us to fit on an individual line here. But now we at least have some stuff that's going to be easier for us to work with some additional code. Before I move on, does anyone have any questions about anything up to this point or how this code has transformed that data? Okay, thank you, Daniel. Very nice note. Feel free to put any questions in the chat if you have them. I know we're kind of moving through a lot of content, And I highly encourage you to go back and review this notebook or ask me any questions about it if you want to dive into the details. But part of the reason we're moving at this pace is to be able to get to the actual text mining applications here. So we have taken our search, we have gotten back data as a JSON format, and then we've done some conversion to that to access the text within it. Now that we've done that, we can actually perform text mining. Now, text mining is something that gets talked about a lot. I think sometimes it's a bit of a mystical concept. I'm here to tell you that at heart, text mining is just counting words. You're looking at the different words that are there, how frequently they occur, on a page in comparison to other words. It's all just variations of counting. And so we're going to get into a couple basic applications there and see, even just with some very simple stuff, how we can actually use counting to find some interesting insights, even just on these 5 pages. So first, in order to do this, we're going to use some Python libraries that are relevant to working with text data. This is the Natural Language Toolkit. So once that's installed, it has some abilities to help us break this text down into individual words. So as I mentioned with this table up here, right now we have the text, which is great, but it all appears in a single column and all at once. One basic thing we can do to start getting some insights into this is, what if we broke down all of this text into individual words, and then we counted how frequently each of those words appeared on its own in comparison to other words. Now, that sounds simple, but because this data is kind of messy, there are some challenges with that, which is why we use this natural language toolkit to ease this process for us. A key concept in text mining is known as tokenization, and that's where you break down, that big chunk of text, whether it's newspapers, paragraphs, whatever else it may be, you break that text down into individual tokens. A token is usually an individual word, but it might be punctuation as well. It might be numbers. A token, as we'll see, can also be multiple words, like 2 words at a time or 3 words at a time. But what we're going to do is use that NLTK library to go through that column of text in each row in our table, and then we're going to break each of that down into individual words, and then we're going to count how many times each of those words appears and put those together into a table. Before I run this, though, I just want you to think in your head, if I told you I have 5 pages of newsprint, how many individual words do you think are going to appear on that page? Not total number of words, but how many unique words would appear on those 5 pages together? And then once you have that number in your head, we can now actually test that by running this code block. So now, again, we've taken each of those news pages, and we've broken those down into individual words, and then we've counted the number of times that each of those occurs. And I have this print out the number of unique words that, or unique tokens rather, that appears in total, and it's about 2,400. This table here, just for ease, only shows the top 15 that occur. Now, when I look at this, there are a couple of different things that really stand out to me. One is the presence of punctuation. We have a comma here, we have an apostrophe, a comma, a period. Those occur a lot, which makes a lot of sense. Most sentences end with a period. A lot of sentences have multiple commas, so it makes sense that they would occur as well. The other thing that stands out to me is that a lot of these words are little words that are quite common, that I would expect to show up a lot in any group of text that we look at. Words like the, of, in, and. But the last thing that I notice here is that we do have one word here, Kentucky, that I think is probably unique to the search parameters that we put in. Because we were searching specifically for the phrase University of Kentucky, obviously the word Kentucky is going to appear a lot there, but not necessarily 106 times. So probably there are a lot of other news stories other than just whichever one mentions the University of Kentucky that appear on this page. And the last thing that I'll point out about this is, like I mentioned, the OCR data can be very messy. There are a lot of things that don't transcribe properly when they get converted to computer text. But even with all of that mess, we can still actually start to see some patterns emerging here. And that's part of the advantage of looking at textual data at scale. Even if there are individual errors on a single page, those will weigh less in the data set as a whole when you're looking at more pages at once. Now, uh, this is where we can start to get into some insights, not just for these particular news pages, but for text mining as a whole and some insights that come out of that. So even if you put in your own search terms here, I bet this list will look a little bit different for you, but I bet that when you run this code, generating a chart of the number of times that the most common words appear, it will have a shape very similar to this. And we can actually compare this to the table above, even though there are no labels on this axis. We can see this word that appears more than 100 times is the word the from our table. We can see that the one right next to it is a comma and then a period, and then there's little words like in, and of. But I just want to draw your attention to how steeply the curve on this graph drops. There are these words that occur a huge amount of time in this data or in this collection of pages, but then a lot of other words, in fact, over 2,400 that occur very infrequently. Like only, it looks even when we get to the 100th most frequent word, it's only occurring about 10 times. And this is another really beautiful thing about text mining. This is known as Zipf's law. Not sure if I pronounced that right, but hopefully close. But this is something that's very consistent with any group of textual data that you look at. There will very likely be a small number of words that occur very, very frequently, and then a lot of other words that occur very infrequently, like less than 10 times. Now, that's sort of the basic insight of that text mining can give us. But if we want to actually start looking into some things specific to the pages that we have selected with our search, then we're going to need to make some additional changes and perform some data cleaning. The most common way to do that is to eliminate what's known as stop words. So in natural language processing or in text mining, there are a lot of those little words like the, and of that occur very frequently, but generally researchers don't think that they tell us all that much about the particular pages that we're searching or performing text mining on. I'll note that some researchers actually focus specifically on stop words and their frequency, so it's not something that everyone agrees on. But it is a good way, if you want to get into some more interesting, unique properties of your collection. So the natural language toolkit library that we're using actually includes a preloaded list of stop words. And they're called stop words because they're used to essentially tell your code, all right, count up all of these words, but if you reach a word that's on the stop word list, stop. Don't count it. Don't include it in the data. And so this has a default list of common words there, but I'll note that for now, we don't need to worry about getting into the specific words that are included there. But if you are performing your own analysis, it's generally a good idea to have your own stop word list so that you know everything that's being removed and you know every step that's happening with your data there. So here, now that we've got that list of stop words, I've also gone ahead and added some custom ones that I know aren't included there, like the period, like the comma, like the apostrophe, semicolon, etc. So then we're gonna run over that same original table that we had again with that text all just in a single cell, but this time we're not gonna count any of the stop words. And when we look at it this time, here it looks like there were some things that I missed here, like the apostrophe S is getting counted as its own stop or as its own token. So maybe we wouldn't want to include that. But we do start to get to a lot more interesting content words that tell us about what these news pages are actually about. So Kentucky is the most common word. Then we have state. We have other interesting words like county, school, and schools. Maybe we would want to make some additional changes to our code to combine those two words together, although that would get a little bit more complex. But basically, once we get rid of those stop words, then we can start to get into some more subject analysis here. And I also printed out this line here showing that when we took out stop words, we reduced our number of tokens from about 2,400 to about 2,100. So there were about 300 tokens here that counted as stop words for us. And then the last concept that I'll cover before we wrap today is the idea of n-grams. So far, we've looked at everything, or the text mining that we've performed has been looking at tokens as individual units, mostly individual words, sometimes an individual point of punctuation. An n-gram is the idea of what if instead of chunking our data down into like individual units, words, punctuation, etc., what if we chunked it into groups of two instead? That would be known as a bigram. Maybe we would do groups of three. That would be a trigram. And this process goes on up to larger units. After a certain point, you stop calling them like bigrams or trigrams, and you start just calling them like a 17 gram and 18 gram instead. Now, the reason this can be useful is because sometimes you actually need a bit of additional context there around that word. So if I tell you that the word pool occurs a lot on a newspaper, you might want to know, does the word pool frequently occur in the phrase swimming pool or pool hall? Because those would give us different meanings of the word pool and would tell us different things about the content of that page. So that's what this block of code does. Rather than break this down into individual tokens, we're going to look at bigrams instead and just see how this changes what we're looking at. Here, I'll note I did not remove stop words. So we went back to the original table that we had. So that's why we see phrases like of the, in the, etc. But then we do see other phrases like in Kentucky, Kentucky with a period, of Kentucky. That one makes a lot of sense because we were searching specifically for University of Kentucky. Um, but the thing to point out here is that you'll notice we have a lot more unique bigrams here. Even though when we were just looking at individual tokens, we had about 2,400 unique ones. Here we have almost 6,400. That being said, the count of how many times each of those occurs is a lot lower. So the most frequent bigram only occurs 92 times, as opposed to the most frequent individual token, which occurred more than 400 times. So when we count bigrams or trigrams or go up that ladder, we'll have more individual unique units to work with, but the individual counts will be lower for them. So that means that n-grams are typically better to work with when you have a larger data set that you're working with. Here, we're only looking at 5 news pages, so a lot of those are fairly low. If we were looking at hundreds or thousands of news pages, then we could probably actually find some more interesting things when we count bigrams. So that's everything that I have in terms of covering these text mining concepts, but I did want to leave you with some additional resources here. So if you want to explore this on your own, I definitely recommend that you save a copy of the notebook here and make some changes to it. Play around with the code a little bit. If you mess things up and you're not sure how to change it, you can just go back to this copy that I have here and re-download the original, and then you can start fresh there. The biggest place that I would recommend making changes to would be to just play around with the search terms, which I have right up here. So try putting in a different search term there. Maybe look for a different state. Maybe play around, and if you feel confident in it, try entering some criteria based on years or based on a particular newspaper. I didn't demonstrate how to do that here, but I do include at the bottom a link to the Chronicling America API documentation, which gives instructions on what each of those individual parts of the URL does and how you can add that as parameters to your search to change the data that you're accessing. I've also included some links to resources for teaching and scholarship with Chronicling America data. The University of Alabama has a good resource experimenting with some different API calls. So if you want some inspiration, check that out. And then the Library of Congress also includes other digital scholarship tools as well. And then finally, I included a list of other text mining resources that are helpful. Another big concept in text mining is topic modeling, which is explained very well in this blog post. These things all, for the most part, come back to that basic idea of counting words, but they take it a little bit farther. If you want an example specifically of a really cool research project using Chronicling America, I suggest checking out this viral text project from Ryan Cordell and David Smith. They used a process similar to what we did here today, although somewhat more advanced, to look for the degree to which different different types of news content were copied from one newspaper to another and the order in which that happened. So they looked for different bigrams that occur frequently to find things like poems or news articles that appear in one paper to another, to then be able to map the connections to see, okay, who's copying news content from another paper, in what order, what influence is happening there. So all of that I find to be very cool. So thank you very much for coming today. I'm going to stop the recording now, and we'll stick around for any remaining questions that any of you have as well. So thank you very much.